Good morning, Arkansas. My name is William Hanson, and I am the Democratic candidate for Congress in Arkansas's 4th Congressional District. This pandemic has certainly altered the way I intend to conduct my campaign. I would much rather be with you and your community, meeting you face to face, but until it's safe to do so for us to come back together, I hope that you would join me on Facebook and online for us to have a good discussion about what we are facing here in Arkansas. First, let me take a moment to thank all the essential workers out there, the medical personnel, the public health workers, the first responders, the grocery clerks, the truck drivers, all those people out there who are keeping our communities afloat. Let's send our prayers out for them to stay safe and thank them for the great work they're doing. I also hope that all of you are keeping yourself safe and healthy and your families during this pandemic. The pandemic has given us our new normal. More importantly, I believe it has exposed the gaps and the cracks in our social safety net. It has also exposed the inequalities that exist in our poor communities and our communities of color, an issue that we need to address urgently. Before I dive into some of the issues that form the basis of my campaign, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm running for Congress. I was born in Camden, Arkansas, and my wife and Doretta and I have been married for almost 35 years. We have 2 grown children. I went to high school in Stevens, Arkansas, and after high school graduation, I attended the University of Arkansas Fayetteville for a short time before volunteering for the United States Army. After an honorable discharge, I came back to Arkansas, spent about a semester up at Henderson State University in Arkadelphia. But after a semester, I decided it was time for me to find greener pastures. So I moved on to California. And California is where I began working with Vietnam veterans, helping them to readjust back to society after coming home from the war. It was that work with veterans that got me on the road to being a community organizer, to studying law and public policy. I have a degree from UC Berkeley in political economy and a law degree from Columbia University in New York. I'm licensed to practice law in California and Colorado, and for the last quarter of a century, I've spent most of my time practicing and or teaching law at public and private institutions and at different educational levels, college, law school, etc. I retired from teaching last spring and decided it was time for me to come home to Arkansas. So here I am with you now. When I came home, I wasn't planning to run for Congress, but I soon realized that we are living in turbulent times, and we need representation and leadership in Washington that, one, respects the rule of law, representation that will focus on issues important to Arkansas and working people, leaders that will hold themselves and others accountable, and leaders willing to work to bring our communities together. My opponent, Mr. Westerman, he's a good man. I do believe that. I have no reason to doubt that. But I have seen little in his time as our representative that suggests to me that he has the political courage, the leadership, or focus on issues that are key concern to us here in Arkansas. It's not what you say, but what you do. And quite frankly, he's done very little to address some of these key issues. Like most Republicans, with few exceptions, Mr. Westerman operates more as an enabler of President Donald Trump. He votes with the president 95% of the time. It was his lack of leadership on issues related of concern to us in Arkansas and his blind obedience to President Trump. They are at the heart of my decision to challenge him in this election. What are those issues I'm talking about? As I mentioned, the pandemic has exposed the cracks in our social safety net and the inequalities that exist in poor communities and communities of color. And talking with you today, I want to talk about a few key issues. Now, I'm not presumptuous to say that I know all the issues that are important to you. And we can't cover all of them today, but I want to talk about 6 key issues for which I have profound disagreements with Mr. Westerman. What are they? Voting and civic engagement, affordable medical care, education and jobs, women's rights, food insecurity, and finally, criminal justice reform. Why voting? In 2018, Arkansas was 49th in voter turnout. I fear that because of the pandemic, that could be even lower in November, particularly if we don't make it easy for people to get out and vote safely. What can we do? First, I think there's online voter registration. That's simple and easy, and you can protect against fraud. Second thing we can do is provide every registered voter with a no excuse absentee ballot. Again, voting by mail, simple and safe. The third thing we could do is expand the period for early voting, which would keep people from clustering together during such a short period before the actual election day. We could also expand the number of voting centers that we have as well in order to give people more options. Now, if someone truly believes in democracy, why would you object to making it easy for citizens to vote? That's a question Mr. Westerman needs to answer. But I won't try to answer that for Mr. Westerman. I'll simply point out that he voted against the Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2019. This was an act to restore some of the pre-clearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted by the Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder. He also voted against the For the People Act of 2019. This act would have had automatic registration for eligible citizens. When you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote. It would also have limited partisan gerrymandering. And finally, it would have made Election Day a holiday. That's my favorite provision because it would give us a day to talk about who we are and who we want to be, to have a discussion like we're in the village square talking about political issues. But probably the most critical vote he took was his vote against the SHIELD Act of 2019. This act was designed to require campaigns to report harmful interference from a foreign government in the election process. This was the same type of action that led to President Trump's impeachment and the impeachment for which Mr. Westerman voted against. Affordable medical care. Again, we see the gaps in our healthcare industry, both in terms of infrastructure and how people are covered. This is particularly important for rural hospitals, which we have here in the 4th District. This virus is most efficient in attacking our most vulnerable populations, the poor, the elderly, and people with pre-existing conditions. Across the country and in Arkansas, we see significant racial disparities in terms of who gets exposed to the virus and who is harmed by it. Particularly poor communities and communities of color where you have people who don't have access to good medical care. A lot of them have pre-existing conditions. Guess what? Mr. Westerman voted against the Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions Act of 2019. He also voted against the Lower Drug Costs Now Act of 2019. And finally, he voted against the U.S. Border Medical Screening Standards Act. This was an act designed to screen people who come across our borders. And if they come across illegally, they should be screened before they're put into custody. If we had had such an act in place, we would not have lost the children who died in U.S. custody. Women's rights. It's important to note that we are celebrating the centennial of the women's right to vote in the 19th Amendment. Mr. Westerman and I have fundamental disagreements about women's rights. First, there's abortion. I'm pro-choice. I support a woman's right to choose quality medical reproductive services. Mr. Westerman, on the other hand, opposes abortion, even in the case of rape and incest. While I understand the religious implications involved in a decision about whether to have an abortion or not, I want to suggest that that's a decision between a woman and her God, and that men and other individuals or the state have no right to be involved in that decision. But women's rights aren't just about abortion. There are economic rights at stake here. In Arkansas, women 18 and over earn 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. Guess what? Mr. Westerman voted against the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would have provided equal pay for women. How hard is it to conclude that people should get equal pay for equal work? I think that's a rather simple proposition. He also voted against the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2019. This one is personal to me. My sister was a victim, a homicide victim, in a domestic violence incident. In 2016, Arkansas ranked 4th in female homicide victims. This is homicide victims murdered by males and single incident and single victim incidents. But that's just a euphemism for saying domestic violence. On another note as well, Mr. Westerman voted against extending the deadline for the Equal Rights Amendment. In this centennial year of a women's right to vote, he's still voting against equal rights for women. Right now, with the economy stalled and wide-scale unemployment, there are few jobs to be had. This pandemic has created uncertainty about what the job market or the economy will look like after this is over. What we do know and what we will need is leadership that will fight for Arkansas in the 4th Congressional District after we recover from this pandemic. During the 2020 census, the 4th District is expected to lose about 60,000 citizens. They will go to the Northwest, Fayetteville, Northeast, Jonesboro, or maybe to Central Arkansas, to Little Rock. Some may leave Arkansas altogether. Simply put, our young people are moving to where the jobs are. We have to be aggressive in attracting and keeping businesses in the 4th District. You just can't simply focus on a single industry like forestry, like Mr. Westerman seems to do. We need businesses that will encourage young families to stay in the district and businesses that will provide them with a living wage enough to support a family. To accomplish this, we will need a well-developed workforce development plan. The key to that plan will be our educational institutions, high school all the way to college, as well as vocational. We also will need someone capable of working with industry and creating the partnerships necessary for us to create the 21st century workforce needed for Arkansas. I'm ready for this task. Part of my work experience involves serving as the Dean of Community Partnerships and Workforce Development. I know how to develop those relationships in order to provide the types of jobs our citizens need. 5th issue is food insecurity. Last week, Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, said that we have plenty of food for all of our citizens. Yet Arkansas ranked 2nd in food insecurity in 2018. Even before the pandemic, 1 in 5 Arkansans didn't know where their next meal was coming from. 25% of all children were at risk for hunger. In a state where food production is one of our key industries, I don't understand why we're able to do this. I also don't understand why our state legislature and our congressional delegation aren't screaming at the top of their lungs about this issue. This is something that we can fix if we have the political will. Criminal justice reform is the next, probably one of the most important issues in Arkansas. I spent most of the last decade serving as the department chair for a criminal justice program at a community college. I also serve as the director of the Law and Democracy program. In my work and research, it became clear to me that a society should be judged in part by the fairness of its criminal justice system. Let's look at some of these statistics in Arkansas. Between 2012 and 2017, the fastest growing prison population in the country was Arkansas. In 2017, the Black adult incarceration rate was 4 times that of the white incarceration rate. Despite accounting for only 15% of the population in the state, Blacks accounted for 42% of the prison population in 2017. Now, the law of statistics and probability suggests to me that something is inherently wrong with this picture. We should all be concerned. Criminal justice is not simply a passive system that enforces laws. Criminal justice is a system that actively shapes the relationship between citizens and their communities and their state. Democracy requires that citizens have a voice in their government, that officials are accountable to the citizens and that citizens are treated fairly and with equal concern. Our social contract and a healthy democracy depend on the cooperation of the losers. If we lose the election, we still have to participate. Similarly, people who paid their debts to society should also have an opportunity to become part of the society again. If part of society feels that they're not a respected stakeholder or that they're not treated fairly, the quality of our democracy is compromised and weakened. In Arkansas, because of felony disenfranchisement, almost 8% of Black Arkansans have lost their right to vote. We have to incorporate people back into their communities and into their families. This is not just good for them, it's good for all of us as well. In conclusion, friends, we are headed for the most consequential election of our lifetime. The stakes are really high. We have a chance to decide who we are and what we want to be. In the past, we've fought some epic battles in Arkansas to decide and to make sure that everyone has an equal chance to succeed. I don't think we want or need to fight these battles again. If we work together, we can win this future. So I'm asking you to join me and join my campaign. Help us win this future. I want to thank all of you for allowing me this opportunity to introduce myself today. And I want to encourage all of you all to follow me on social media, comment on the posts, ask questions. I promise you I will respond. Until the next time, stay safe and have a blessed day. I'm William Hanson, and I approve of this message.